Amina first heard the scream on a night that looked completely ordinary. The kind of night where nothing ever seems capable of becoming a memory that changes your life. The street was quiet, the kind of residential silence where distant fans hum, kitchens settle after dinner, and people convince themselves that whatever they hear is not their concern. She was sitting near the window folding clothes when the sound cut through everything. It was not a casual noise or a brief moment of panic. It was long, sharp, and full of fear. The kind of scream that does not belong to argument or anger, but to someone who believes they are not going to be safe in the next moment. Amina stopped immediately, her hands frozen mid-fold, her attention fully captured as the sound seemed to rise from next door. House number 17, the new neighbors. For a moment, she waited for what usually follows such a sound in normal life. Doors opening, voices responding, someone asking what happened. But nothing came. The street remained unchanged, as if the scream had never existed. Even more disturbing than the sound itself was the silence that followed it, heavy and intentional, as if the world had chosen not to acknowledge what it had just heard. She stepped out of her room and into the small corridor, calling softly to the neighbors across the hall, asking if they had heard anything. The responses were careless, almost rehearsed. One man dismissed it as children fighting. Another woman refused to acknowledge it at all, shutting her door too quickly. The reactions did not comfort Amina. Instead, they made her uneasy, because she was certain of what she had heard. It had not been children. It had not been a misunderstanding. It had been fear. That night, sleep did not come to her easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the scream again, followed by that unnatural silence that felt heavier than the sound itself. Around 2 a.m, unable to ignore the feeling growing inside her, she got up quietly and stood near her window, looking at House 17. From the outside, it appeared normal, even peaceful. A faint light glowed from an upper room, curtains drawn tightly, as if nothing inside wanted to be seen. But something about the house felt wrong in a way she could not explain. It was not what she saw, but what she could not see. After several minutes of hesitation, she left her apartment and stepped outside. The street was darker now, the air still, and even the smallest sound seemed amplified. She walked slowly toward House 17, stopping at its gate. It was locked. She tried peering through the windows, but saw only thick curtains blocking any view inside. Then she noticed something she had not seen before during the day. A narrow passage between the house and the neighboring wall, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Something in her mind told her not to go there, but her feet moved anyway. At the back of the house, she discovered a small basement window, partially hidden behind metal bars. It did not look like an entrance meant for normal use. It looked concealed, forgotten, or deliberately hidden. As she stepped closer, she heard something faint, a dragging sound, like movement from inside. She crouched down, heart beating faster now, and whispered softly if anyone was there. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, very faintly, a voice responded, a single word, a plea for help. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She backed away instinctively, fear and urgency fighting inside her. Every rational thought told her to leave, to go back inside, to forget what she heard and let it become someone else's problem. But the voice stayed with her, fragile and broken, refusing to leave her mind. And that was the moment she made her decision. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the kind of decision that changes everything. She returned to her room, gathered a flashlight, a metal rod she kept for safety, and a screwdriver. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. When she came back to House 17, the world felt even quieter than before, as if it was holding its breath. She approached the basement window again, pressed her ear against the wall, and heard it once more. Help. This time, she did not hesitate. She struck the wooden covering with the iron rod, once, twice. The sound echoed through the empty night. On the third strike, the wood cracked enough for her to pull pieces away with her hands. What she revealed was not a basement in the normal sense, but a hidden, enclosed room. And inside it, lying on a thin mattress, was a woman who looked like she had been forgotten by time itself. Her wrists were bruised. Her face was pale. When the light from Amina's flashlight touched her, she flinched, as if she had stopped believing light would ever reach her again. She tried to move backward, fear taking over her body. But Amina quickly spoke, telling her she was there to help, that she would get her out. The woman did not respond immediately. Instead, she stared, as if trying to decide whether Amina was real or another illusion created by desperation. Then, slowly, her voice broke into a whisper. She asked if someone had really come. She said she had screamed before. She had screamed many times, and no one had come. Amina felt something tighten in her chest as she helped the woman gather enough strength to move. It took time, and every movement seemed painful, but eventually she crawled toward the opening. Amina pulled her through carefully, supporting her as she collapsed outside the window into the night air. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then the woman began to cry. Not loudly, but in a way that carried exhaustion rather than sound, as if she had forgotten how to hope. "We have to leave," Amina whispered. And just as they turned to move away, a sound came from inside the house. A door opening, slow footsteps, and a calm voice that carried through the silence as if it had been expecting them all along. Amina froze. Someone inside House 17 had finally realized the night was no longer quiet. The footsteps from inside House 17 were slow and deliberate, each step landing with a quiet confidence that made Amina's skin crawl. It was not the hurried chaos of someone who had just discovered an intrusion. It was calm, almost patient, as if the person walking toward the back of the house had known this moment would come eventually and had simply been waiting for it. Amina instinctively pulled the injured woman closer behind her, shifting her body to block the view of the basement window. Her grip tightened around the iron rod she had brought, though in that moment it felt smaller and less powerful than before. The night air suddenly felt heavier, pressing down on her shoulders, and every sound, the distant hum of a generator, the rustle of a stray leaf, seemed to sharpen into something threatening. The back door of the house creaked open. A tall man stepped into the dim light spilling from inside. He did not rush. He did not shout. He simply looked at them, as though confirming something he already knew. His expression was not one of surprise, but mild irritation, like someone dealing with a small inconvenience that had disrupted an otherwise controlled routine. "Oh," he said quietly, his voice almost conversational. "So it finally happened." Amina's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "Let her go," she said, her voice shaking but firm enough to carry. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her as if she were a puzzle he had already solved. "You think you're the first person who's ever heard something?" he asked. "You think no one has ever come close before you?" Behind Amina, the injured woman trembled, pressing closer as if trying to disappear into her shadow. Amina didn't turn back. She couldn't afford to. Her focus had to stay forward, on the man, on the distance between them, on the narrow space that still existed for escape. "I don't care what you think," Amina said, swallowing fear as she spoke. "She's leaving with me." A faint smile appeared on the man's face. Not warm, not amused, but something colder. Recognition mixed with certainty. "That's what they all say," he replied. For a brief moment, no one moved. The silence between them felt stretched, fragile, as if the slightest sound could break it into violence. Then the man took a step forward. That single step shattered Amina's hesitation. She swung the iron rod with all her strength. It connected with his arm with a dull, heavy impact. The man stumbled back slightly, more surprised than injured, his calm expression cracking for the first time into something sharper. "Go!" Amina shouted over her shoulder without looking back. The injured woman hesitated for only a second, then crawled toward the narrow drainage passage Amina had noticed earlier. It was barely wide enough for a person, dark and damp, but it was the only escape route available. The man recovered quickly. Too quickly. He lunged forward again, faster this time, but Amina stepped between them, blocking his path. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. She swung the rod again, forcing him to step back once more. He was strong, but he was not panicked. That was what frightened her most. He was still in control of himself. Behind her, she heard the woman scrambling through the narrow gap, her movements desperate but determined. That sound gave Amina a brief surge of strength. The man's eyes shifted, tracking the sound. "That won't help her," he said calmly. Amina didn't answer. She raised the rod again, but this time he anticipated her movement. He caught her wrist mid-swing, gripping it tightly. His strength was immediate and crushing, and for a moment Amina felt the weapon slipping from her hand. Pain shot through her arm, but she didn't let go. She struggled, twisting her body, trying to break free. The man leaned closer, his voice dropping slightly. "You don't understand what you've walked into," he said. "This isn't your problem to solve." Amina gritted her teeth and forced herself to speak through the fear. "It is now." In that instant, she did something reckless. She stepped forward instead of back, closing the distance between them and driving her shoulder into his chest. The sudden movement disrupted his grip just enough for her to pull free. The iron rod fell to the ground, but she didn't reach for it. There was no time. The woman was almost through the drainage passage. Amina made her decision in a split second. She turned and ran. The man reacted immediately, his calm finally breaking into urgency. He followed. Amina could hear his footsteps behind her now, faster, closer, no longer controlled. The narrow passage beside the house became her only path. She ran toward it without looking back, her breath sharp and uneven, her feet slipping slightly on the uneven ground. Behind her, she heard the man shout for the first time, not in anger, but in command, as if ordering the situation back under control. But the knight no longer obeyed him. Amina reached the drainage opening and dropped to her knees, crawling into the tight space without hesitation. The smell of damp earth and rust filled her senses, but she forced herself forward. Ahead of her, she could see the faint outline of the injured woman already crawling toward the other side, struggling but moving. For a moment, Amina thought they might make it. Then, she felt a hand grab her ankle. Her body jerked backward slightly, panic flashing through her chest. She kicked instinctively, twisting her leg with all her strength. The grip loosened just enough for her to pull free and push forward into the passage. The man's voice came from behind the wall now, distorted by the narrow space. "You should have left it alone." Amina didn't respond. She kept crawling. The passage felt endless, but finally, she saw light ahead, the opening on the other side of the wall. The injured woman had already emerged and was pulling herself up weakly onto the street beyond. "Amina," she whispered urgently. Amina pushed herself forward one last time and collapsed out of the passage into the open air. The moment she landed, she felt the world widen again. The street, the distant lights, the possibility of escape. But there was no time to rest. The man would find another way out. They both knew it. Amina grabbed the woman's arm and helped her stand. "We need people," she said breathlessly. "We need the road. We need witnesses." They started running. Barefoot on cold pavement, through silent streets that still hadn't woken up to what was happening. Every house they passed remained dark, Every window stayed closed. It felt like the entire neighborhood had agreed in silence not to see them. Amina's mind screamed at that thought. Someone has to see us. They reached the main road finally, where the faint glow of a passing rickshaw cut through the darkness. Amina waved desperately, her voice breaking as she shouted for help. The rickshaw slowed. The driver looked at them, two terrified women, one barely able to stand, and immediately pulled over. "Police!" Amina gasped, almost collapsing. "Call the police!" For the first time that night, someone listened without hesitation. As the rickshaw pulled them away from House 17, Amina turned back once. In the distance, she thought she saw a figure standing near the entrance of the street, watching. Not chasing, just watching. And that realization stayed with her even as sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, because she understood something then. This was not an isolated house. It was something protected by silence. And silence, she was beginning to realize, was not accidental. The police station lights felt too bright after the darkness of House 17. Amina sat on a hard bench, her hands still trembling, her clothes dusted with dirt from the drainage passage. Across from her, the rescued woman was wrapped in a thin shawl someone had given her, but she still looked like she hadn't fully returned to the present. Every few seconds, she would flinch at small sounds, as if expecting footsteps to come from behind her again. Amina tried to speak clearly when the officers asked questions, but her voice kept breaking in places she didn't expect. She described the scream, the hidden window, the basement room, the man, the chase. Each sentence felt unreal as she said it aloud, as if she were reporting someone else's nightmare rather than her own memory. At first, the officers listened like they had heard similar complaints before, serious but not urgent. But everything changed when one of them received a phone call. A short conversation, a pause, then a very different expression on his face. Within 20 minutes, multiple police vehicles were moving through the quiet streets toward House 17. Amina insisted on going with them. The rescued woman refused to stay behind as well. Neither of them spoke during the ride. The sirens cut through the night like a warning that had arrived too late. When they reached the street, everything looked unchanged at first. House 17 stood quietly in the same place, its windows dark, its exterior ordinary. It did not look like a place where someone had been screaming for help. But Amina knew better now. Police surrounded the house quickly, securing exits and calling for backup. One officer knocked loudly at the front door. There was no immediate response. Then, after a long pause, the door opened. The same man stood there, calm, composed, almost annoyed. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The officer didn't answer directly. "We need to search the property." A faint smile crossed the man's face. "On what grounds?" Amina stepped forward immediately. "There's a woman inside," she said, loudly. "You already know there is." For the first time, the man's gaze shifted toward her. A small flicker of recognition passed through his expression. "Oh," he said softly. "You brought witnesses." The way he said it made something in Amina's stomach tighten. The officers didn't wait for more conversation. They entered the house. What they found inside was not what they expected. The living space on the ground floor was clean, too clean, almost deliberately maintained. No signs of struggle, no noise, no visible evidence of anything unusual. It looked like a normal, slightly modern household that belonged to someone careful and controlled. But Amina was not interested in what was visible anymore. She walked straight toward the back. "I told you," she said to the officers. There's a hidden room. They followed her. At the basement entrance, one officer found the partially damaged wooden covering. It had been hastily repaired, but not properly hidden. That alone made the officers pause. A second team was called in immediately. When they broke through the structure and accessed the lower level, the air changed. The hidden room was still there, but it was not alone. It was part of a system. One room led to another, and another. Small enclosed spaces behind false walls, some empty, some containing traces of recent use, old bedding, restraints, personal belongings that had been removed too quickly to erase evidence completely. One officer muttered under his breath, "This is not just one victim." And he was right. The discovery deepened as they searched further. Behind a storage cabinet, they found a concealed door that led to a narrow corridor not visible from the houses. The main structure. The corridor connected to another sealed room, and then another. Each one designed the same way. Minimal space, no windows, controlled access, reinforced locks from the outside. A system built not for one person, but for rotation, for containment, for disappearance. Amina stood frozen at the entrance of one of the rooms, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The reality of what she was seeing was heavier than fear now. It was something else entirely. "This isn't just kidnapping," one officer said quietly. "This is organized." The rescued woman, standing behind Amina, suddenly grabbed her arm tightly. Her breathing became uneven. "I was not the first," she whispered. Amina turned toward her. "What do you mean?" The woman's eyes filled with something close to panic. "There were others," she said. "He said there were others before me. I heard them sometimes. I heard doors opening at night, people being moved." A silence fell across the room. That was when one of the officers discovered something deeper inside the structure. A locked metal cabinet. Inside it were documents. Not personal papers. Records. Names. Dates. Movements. Transfers. Amina watched from behind as the officer slowly scanned the pages, his expression changing with each line. Then he stopped. He looked up slowly, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to say what he had just understood. "This isn't just one house," he said quietly. Another officer stepped closer. "What do you mean?" The first officer hesitated. Then he turned the page slightly so others could see. There were multiple addresses listed, different parts of the city, different neighborhoods, all marked with similar coded notes. And at the top of the page was a symbol Amina didn't recognize. But the officers did. The room fell silent. Because now they understood something far worse than a single crime. This house was not isolated. It was a node, part of a network. And House 17 was only one point on a map that stretched further than anyone had expected. Outside, sirens from additional units arrived. The man was already in custody, but he did not look shaken when they brought him out. He walked past Amina slowly, deliberately, as if the entire night had been something mildly inconvenient, rather than catastrophic. When his eyes met hers again, he spoke softly. "You didn't save her," he said. "You just moved her." Amina felt her stomach drop. "What does that mean?" she demanded. But he didn't answer. He was already being taken away. And that silence, the refusal to explain, was somehow worse than anything he had done. Because it suggested the story was not ending here. It was only beginning to open. The hours after the raid passed in a blur of flashing lights, sealed-off streets, and hurried conversations that no one allowed Amina to fully understand. She sat in a small room inside the police station, while officers came and went, speaking in low, urgent tones. Files were opened, phones rang nonstop, and maps were spread across tables like the city itself had suddenly become something unfamiliar. But the most disturbing change was not the activity. It was the silence between the words. No one said, "This is solved." No one said, "It's over." Instead, they kept saying things like, "expand the search," and "verify the other locations," and "we need central coordination," as if House 17 had been only a doorway. The rescued woman, still shaken, still fragile, was taken for medical care and questioning. Before she left, she held Amina's hand tightly for a moment longer than necessary. "You heard me when no one else did," she whispered. "Don't forget that part." Amina nodded, but she already felt something shifting inside her. Because the more she replayed the night in her mind, the more she realized how strange it was. Not just the house, not just the man, but the absence around it. The way neighbors ignored the scream. The way no one reacted. The way everything felt quietly trained to stay away. That feeling only deepened when an officer finally asked her to come into another room. A large map of the city was pinned to the wall. Red marks were scattered across it. Not many at first glance, but enough. The officer pointed to House 17. Then he pointed to another location. Then another. Amina frowned. "What is this?" The officer hesitated before answering. "Locations connected to similar complaints," he said. "Unresolved reports, missing persons, noise complaints that were dismissed, houses people avoided, patterns we didn't connect before." Amina's throat tightened. "How many?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He just looked at the map again, as if confirming something he didn't want to be real. Then he said, "More than we want to count." A silence fell in the room that felt heavier than anything she had experienced that night. Because that was the moment Amina understood something terrifying. House 17 had not been unique. It had been normal. Just unnoticed. The investigation escalated quickly after that. Units were assigned, files reopened, old complaints pulled from archives. But what they found made everything more complicated instead of clearer. Many of the listed locations had been investigated before. Some were marked as false alarms. Some were labeled domestic disputes resolved. Others simply disappeared from records entirely after initial reports. When Amina asked how that was possible, no one gave her a direct answer. Instead, they asked her to describe the man again, and again, and again. Each time they wrote something different in their notes, as if they were not just documenting him, but trying to place him inside something larger they still didn't fully understand. Late that night, one senior officer finally spoke more openly in a quiet corner of the station, where Amina happened to be sitting nearby. "We've seen patterns like this before," he said, not directly to her, but to another officer. "But never this coordinated." "Coordinated how?" the other asked. The senior officer lowered his voice. "People don't ignore screams this consistently unless there's pressure involved," he said. "Or conditioning. Or both." Amina's attention sharpened instantly. She stepped forward. "What are you saying?" The officer looked at her for a long moment before answering carefully. "I'm saying," he said, "that the silence around that house may not have been natural." That sentence changed something in the room. Because until then, Amina had believed the worst part was the hidden room. Now, she began to understand the worst part might be everything outside it. The breakthrough came 2 days later. A task team analyzing seized documents from House 17 discovered something hidden inside the records: coded communication patterns. Not random notes, but structured identifiers. References that linked multiple properties in different areas under the same repeating symbols. It wasn't just a network of houses. It was a system of coordination. One officer compared it to logistics tracking. Movements of people, transfer points, observation periods, and something else that made the room go silent again. Non-report zones, one analyst muttered. Amina looked up sharply. What does that mean? The officer hesitated before answering. Areas where complaints consistently fail to progress, he said. Where reports are made but never escalate. Where witnesses stop following up. Amina felt a cold wave pass through her chest. Stop following up? She repeated. The officer nodded slowly. Or are discouraged from continuing. That was when Amina remembered something she had initially dismissed. The neighbors who said they heard nothing. The man who told her not to get involved. The strange calm in the entire building that night. It was not just fear. It was pattern. That evening, she asked to see the man again. The request was unusual, but eventually allowed under supervision. He was in a temporary holding room, sitting calmly with his hands folded, as if he were waiting for a delayed appointment, rather than being held in connection with multiple crimes. When Amina entered, he looked up immediately and smiled faintly. I was wondering when you'd come back, he said. Amina didn't sit down. Who else is involved? She asked directly. The man tilted his head. You're asking the wrong question, he replied. Her voice hardened. Answer me. He leaned back slightly, studying her with calm interest. You think you broke something, he said. You think you exposed it. Amina stayed silent, waiting. But his next words made the room feel colder. You didn't expose it, he said. You just interrupted a small part of it. Amina felt her hands clench. Liar, she said. But his expression didn't change. If I were lying, he said softly, you wouldn't still be asking questions that no one else is answering. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he added something quieter. You should have stayed away from House 17. Amina's voice dropped. Why? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Because House 17 was not the beginning, he said. It was the warning. And then he leaned forward slightly, his voice almost gentle. And you ignored it. That night, Amina couldn't sleep. Because now she understood something she hadn't understood before. The scream she heard was not the start of the story. It was a leak, a mistake, something that was never supposed to reach her ears. And if that was true, then there were many more rooms like that hidden behind silence all over the city. And she had only seen the first door open. After the interrogation, Amina was not sent home. At first, it was phrased gently, for your safety, for further statements, until things are clearer. But the truth was simple enough for her to feel without anyone explaining it. She had become part of the case, not as a witness anymore, but as someone too closely connected to what House 17 had uncovered. The days that followed blurred into controlled movement inside the station. Short interviews, revised statements, map reviews, and constant questions about memory. Officers kept returning to one detail again and again. The scream, the timing, the neighbors' reactions, the exact sequence of events. It was as if they were trying to rebuild the entire night, not just to understand it, but to confirm whether it could have happened the way she said it did. That part unsettled Amina more than anything else, because she began to realize something strange. They were not questioning her truth. They were measuring its reach. One afternoon, a senior investigator finally called her into a secure room where a much larger map had replaced the earlier one. This version had layers, colored markers, coded labels, connecting lines that formed patterns across the city like veins. Amina stepped closer slowly. Her breath caught. House 17 was no longer alone on the map. It was connected. Not just to one or two places, but to dozens. Some marked in red, some in gray, some faded as if time had already tried to erase them. The investigator spoke quietly. "We traced financial links," he said. "Property transfers, shell ownerships, maintenance contracts. All indirect, all designed to avoid attention." Amina stared at the map. "All of these houses?" she asked. He nodded once. "Yes." Her voice dropped. "And the people inside them?" A pause. Then the answer came carefully. "Some were victims," he said. "Some were moved. Some were never recorded properly." The room felt colder. Amina stepped back slightly. "How many?" The investigator didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the map, as if counting something he didn't want to count again. "More than we can confirm," he said finally. That sentence landed heavier than anything she had heard before, because it meant the system was bigger than documentation, bigger than evidence, bigger than House 17. That night, Amina couldn't stop thinking about something the man had said earlier. "You just moved her." At the time, it sounded like a threat. Now, it sounded like a structure. A system designed not to end, but to continue. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of the younger officers discovered a pattern in the coded documents: rotational scheduling. Houses were not static sites. They were part of a shifting network. People were not kept in one place permanently. They were moved periodically, depending on risk, exposure, and observation cycles. It was not chaos. It was management. And that meant something terrifying. Someone was actively maintaining it, not just hiding it, running it. A meeting was held that night with top investigators. Amina was present only because she insisted on staying involved. No one fully objected anymore. A wall screen displayed connected nodes across multiple districts. One officer spoke carefully. "This isn't a single criminal operation," he said. "It behaves like an infrastructure." Another added, "An infrastructure requires administration." The room went quiet. Amina finally spoke. "So the man from House 17? The investigator nodded slowly. "Not the top," he said. "A coordinator at best." A cold silence filled the room. Because that changed everything. It meant the one she faced, the one she saw dragged away calmly, was not the source. Just a layer. A controlled part of something larger. And then the investigator added something that made the entire room go still. "We believe House 17 was compromised," he said. Amina frowned. "Compromised how?" He looked at her directly. "Someone inside made a mistake," he said. A scream got out. A witness reacted. A pause. Then the final realization. And now the system knows it has been exposed. That night, Amina was escorted home under supervision, but she didn't feel safer. She felt observed. The streets looked normal again, but normal now felt artificial to her, like a surface carefully placed over something unstable. When she reached her building, she stopped for a moment outside the gate. The silence around her felt familiar. Too familiar. She remembered the neighbors who didn't react. The calmness of House 17 before everything happened. The way fear seemed to exist only inside the system, never outside it. And then she understood something she didn't want to understand. Silence was not accidental. It was distributed. 2 days later, the police confirmed something major. Multiple locations linked to the network had been quietly abandoned. Empty rooms. Cleared spaces. Vanished records. Like something was erasing itself in real time. One officer described it simply. "It's collapsing," he said. But Amina noticed something in his tone. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded worried. Because collapse doesn't always mean ending. Sometimes it means relocation. Amina was called in one final time. The man from House 17 requested to speak again. This time, there was no interrogation room, only a controlled glass partition. He looked different now, still calm, still composed, but less certain, as if something outside had finally reached inside his control. When he saw Amina, he smiled faintly again. "You're still here," he said. Amina didn't respond immediately. She studied him carefully. "The network is being exposed," she said. His smile faded slightly. "Is it?" he replied. Amina stepped closer to the glass. "You said I just moved her," she said. "What did you mean?" For the first time, he hesitated. Then he spoke slowly. "You think exposure stops it," he said. "It doesn't." Amina's voice sharpened. "Then what does?" He looked at her for a long moment, then answered in a tone almost like advice. "Control of attention," he said. "That's all it ever was." Amina frowned. "What are you talking about?" But he didn't continue. Instead, he leaned back slightly, as if concluding something in his mind. "You were never supposed to hear her scream," he said quietly. "But you did." A pause. "And now you think that means you changed something." Amina's fists tightened. "Didn't I?" He studied her carefully, then gave a small, uncertain smile. "That depends," he said softly, "on whether you believe you were the only one who heard it." That night, Amina stood by her window again. The same street, the same houses, the same silence. But now she knew silence had depth. It wasn't empty. It was layered. And somewhere within it, there were other rooms, other screams, other people listening when they weren't supposed to. And she realized the final truth of House 17 was not what was inside it. It was what it revealed outside it. That people could hear suffering and still decide it was normal. Amina closed the window slowly, but she did not feel closure. Because somewhere in the distance, so faint, she almost doubted it, she thought she heard another scream. And this time, she wasn't sure where it came from.
After that final meeting, Amina was no longer treated like an ordinary witness. She was moved into a quiet, protective arrangement, given controlled access to case updates, and occasionally called in when new fragments of the network surfaced. But even then, no one fully told her everything. Information came in pieces, like a puzzle that was always missing its most important corner. What she did know was enough to keep her awake at night. The network was still active, not destroyed, not even fully exposed, just disrupted. And disruption, she was learning, was not the same as ending. Weeks passed. More houses were searched. More hidden rooms were discovered. Some were empty. Some showed signs of recent use. Some looked like they had been cleared in a hurry, as if someone had moved through them ahead of the authorities. That detail disturbed Amina the most, because it meant one simple thing. They were being watched back. One evening, Amina was called again, this time not to the station, but to a secured briefing room where only a few senior investigators were present. The atmosphere was different, tense, controlled, less confident than before. A large screen displayed a new map, but this one was not citywide. It was interlinked across regions. Amina stepped closer slowly. "What is this?" she asked. An officer answered quietly. "Continuity mapping," he said. "We followed transfers outside the city. Similar patterns, same structure, same coding system." Amina felt a cold weight settle in her chest. "So it's not local," she said. The officer shook his head once. "No," he replied. "It's replicated." The room went silent. Replicated meant something far worse than expansion. It meant design, intent. Replication meant the system was not accidental, not opportunistic, not even purely criminal in the way people usually understood crime. It meant methodology. Amina looked at the screen, her voice barely above a whisper. "How many?" No one answered immediately. Then one of the analysts spoke carefully. "Enough to suggest coordination beyond one group," he said. "Possibly multiple operators using the same framework." Amina turned slightly. "You're saying there's more than one man like him?" A pause. Then the answer came slowly. "Yes." That night, Amina returned home with an escort. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was being protected. She felt like she was being positioned, like something larger was adjusting around her presence. When she entered her room, she noticed something unusual. A faint mark near her door. Not obvious, not threatening in a visible way, just subtle enough to make her pause. A line of chalk-like dust, almost like a signal. Her breath slowed. She crouched down and looked closer, but it had already been partially smudged, as if someone had tried to erase it in a hurry. Amina stood up slowly. Her thoughts immediately went to House 17, to the silence, to the neighbors who heard nothing, to the way people chose not to react. And suddenly, she wondered something she had never allowed herself to fully consider before. What if silence was not just social? What if it was managed? The next morning, she reported the mark. The officers treated it seriously, but not urgently. That bothered her more than anything else, because she could see the shift happening now. The investigation was no longer a shock. It was becoming routine. And routine was dangerous. Routine meant adaptation. A week later, something unexpected happened. One of the original coded documents recovered from House 17 was reanalyzed. A hidden layer was found inside it. Not physical, digital. A sequence embedded in patterns that only became visible when cross-referenced with other seized files. And when it was decoded, it revealed something no one had expected. A communication layer. Not about locations, not about victims,
But about attention flow. One officer stared at the decoded text for a long time before speaking. "This isn't just a network," he said quietly. "It's a system designed to stay unseen by controlling what people focus on." Amina leaned forward. "Explain." The officer hesitated. "It predicts which incidents will be ignored," he said, "which screams will be dismissed, which reports won't escalate, and it uses that predictability to operate inside blind spots." The room went quiet again. Because suddenly, everything made sense in a way no one wanted it to. House 17 was not powerful because it was hidden. It was powerful because it understood how easily people stop paying attention. That evening, Amina was asked one final question. Not by officers, by herself. Sitting alone in her room, she replayed the first scream again in her mind. The exact moment everything began. And she realized something that made her hands go cold. She had heard it clearly, but she had still doubted it for a few seconds. Even she, someone who ultimately acted, had hesitated. And that hesitation was enough. Later that night, as she stood by her window, the street outside looked unchanged. But she no longer trusted unchanged. Because now she knew unchanged could simply mean unnoticed. And unnoticed was where everything began. Far in the distance, a dog barked once. A light flickered in a house across the street. A door closed somewhere without urgency. Normal sounds. Normal life. But Amina listened differently now. And then, very faintly, almost indistinguishable from memory itself, she heard it again. Not loud, not clear, just enough to remind her of the beginning. A scream, or something like it. Amina didn't move immediately this time. She simply stood still. Was enough. Later that night, as she stood by her window, the street outside looked unchanged. But she no longer trusted unchanged. Because now she knew unchanged could simply mean unnoticed. And unnoticed was where everything began. Far in the distance, a dog barked once. A light flickered in a house across the street. A door closed somewhere without urgency. Normal sounds. Normal life. But Amina listened differently now. And then, very faintly, almost indistinguishable from memory itself, she heard it again. Not loud, not clear, just enough to remind her of the beginning. A scream, or something like it. Amina didn't move immediately this time. She simply stood still, listening, because now she understood the final truth this case had left behind. It was never about one house. It was about how many people hear the truth and decide it is safer not to respond. And somewhere in that silence, the system continued to breathe.